Okay. As someone who has been reading fantasy forever and who kind of loves and enjoys that most of the reading and publishing market right now is made up of women, I'm like trying desperately to understand romance, structurally, narratively, like from an audience perspective, like what is the appeal? As someone who's like not terribly romantic themselves. And after like multiple years of reading romance and sort of analysing it from a literary perspective, I have to say, I do not get it. I still do not get it, lads. And like, from some perspectives, okay, like there's the tension, there's the yearning, there's the understanding of where the plot will go, even without a lot of foreshadowing, like that they're gonna probably get together in the end, and they'll probably meet at the beginning. Like, these are all elements that I understand and respect, but there's just parts of romance that I just don't get. I don't get it. Can someone explain? And one of the things is like the sort of perpetuation of patriarchal values. And when I say that, I really, really don't want to lay this at the feet of individual authors or individual readers. Like, that is not my intention, because I think this is more of a broader trend. And I think blaming individual people for wide trends is like not useful. So like, I don't particularly love it when I see other people who criticize fantasy going and saying things like, oh, romantasy books or romance books are conservative propaganda, and I'm like, because I don't think they're that self-aware, and I don't think a lot of the authors are genuinely conservative. I think the larger problem, which isn't as addressed in book circles because it's more of a broader life problem, is that the metrics of romance are patriarchal in nature. So rather than romance books being patriarchal and conservative, I think that romance in general is, and that is way too broad of a problem for people who like just talk about books to really tackle. Like, the understanding of a man being dominant also being romantic, or or a man being particularly masculine also being a romantic frame, is like patriarchal in nature. And I don't want to say that like every like masculine man is therefore evil because he's patriarchal. I'm like, we obviously know it's more complex than that. But these things being replicated in romantic fiction just makes me confused, because I'm like, I don't find this romantic. This just leads me to believe more and more that popularity in romance and is dependent on personal tastes. And so popular books in romance tend to be ones that align with popular romantic tastes, obviously. But anyway, I was reading a book recently that I got from Vinted, because I love to buy books from Vinted now. And it was really popular. I always saw it in Waterstones. I really liked the cover. And I knew it was not a sexually explicit fantasy. And I was like, I want to read that, because if I write romance, it would be not explicit. And so I want to research what other people are doing. Especially I want to research what the popular people are doing. Because what's the point of doing market research if you're not researching people who are doing well in the market, So anyway, I read the book. It took me 12 hours, and 6 of them I was spent sleeping. I understand the popularity of books that go down easy. And I say this in the best way, because sometimes you want to read a book cover in a night. And that book, it did the job. But from the outset, I thought it would be a really sweet, sort of light as sugar fantasy. And it had an enemies to lovers arc, which I felt was quite hard to marry with the turn. And I really like the writing, and I probably will read another book by this author sometime in the future, because I think there were elements of that were really successful. But at the same time, I kept going, oh my god, this is leaning so hard on patriarchal values, and I didn't expect it. Because sometimes I associate the sort of dark romance with that kind of storytelling, but I don't think that that's the case. I think that it's, in most romances, involving heterosexual couples. I think it's a mainstay of the genre. The book in question was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I liked it and I didn't like it. Sometimes I like books because I love to analyse them, not because they necessarily cater to my specific interests. And I can say that it didn't cater to my specific interests, but I know that it caters to a lot of other people's specific interests. And therefore, if you like the blood, you should read it. I mean, that's just as simple as. Anyway, I had some frustrations that I had with this book, which I have had with other books in the genre. Namely that there is an inclusion of non-con and dub-con elements, and those are fanfic terms. I am an AO3 diehard, so I apologise. Non-con meaning non-consensual, and dub-con meaning dubious consent. I don't think that it's evil for books to contain these things, but I just think it's wild that they are so popular, all things considered. And I guess I know that it comes from the sort of fantasy wherein your perfect romantic partner knows exactly what you want without having to ask. Whereas I really want there to be a romantic focus on asking as part of romance. But again, it's a larger life problem rather than a book problem. The main character kissed a lot of people under duress, and it got quite hot and heavy quite quick. And the main male lead, his name was Jax, he was a compelling character. I will grant it that. He was always showing off his villainy, but that meant he was always being quite violent, not necessarily to her, but certainly around her and threatening. And I found it so strange that a book that was so sweetly portrayed was also quite harsh in that way. Anyway, other elements that bugged me is from this sort of lens where there was a sort of lack of female partnerships and female relationships. There weren't none. There were two significant ones. The main character, Evangeline, she has a stepsister called Marisol, who sort of is there and isn't there, and she has, in the end, a kind of, spoilers, antagonistic role. She was a sort of supporting character, but she was there. And the other one was the lead had a friend called Lala who turned up occasionally. I didn't think she had a lot of screen time, page time, I guess. And Lala saying that they were friends came as a surprise to the main character and came as a surprise to me. Because I didn't think that what I saw on the page signified a really strong friendship. It didn't feel like they had a very strong connection. The female lead had a lot of connections with the male characters, both the male lead and another love interest and this vampire that they meet, and her old love interest from back home, her first love. And I think that's kind of par for the course in some of these books, because obviously the main connection has to be between a man and a woman, and therefore sometimes other relationships, especially between female characters, can get lost and left behind. I think the best example of this being turned on its head recently that I saw was K-pop Demon Hunters, 10 out of 10 film, in which she had an enemies to lovers relationship, even though it was very clearly a subplot for the main plot, which was about defeating demons with K-pop. But she also had very strong relationships with the other band members, and with her aunt, quasi-parental figure, Celine. Which, I mean, when I say strong connections, I also mean conflict can be a strong connection. An antagonist can be a strong, form a strong relationship with the protagonist. But anyway, the thing that bugged me mostly was the lack of agency that Evangeline, the female main character, appeared to have. When she made choices, they didn't necessarily have consequences. And when she took actions, when she made choices, it wasn't necessarily to take action. Often it was how to feel about a particular event. A lot of events happened without her knowledge or understanding. A lot of events, she was encountering curses and poisons, and there was a mystery to solve, but I didn't feel that she put a lot of energy into solving it. It felt like things just kept happening, and she didn't have any time to react to them. She was being overloaded. And there are a lot of scenes with Jax, the male lead, carrying her around, which I completely understand. I love the hurt comfort of it all. But sometimes it felt like that was a bit much. Like, she can walk out of this situation, maybe. Maybe we can... Like, it felt like in every scene, Jax or some other male character would make the move rather than Evangeline. And I think that was especially, like, annoying to me in terms of romance scenes, because it was like she was quite passive with regards to her romantic feelings. There's, she gets married to a... Spoilers, she gets married to a prince. But he's been bewitched to fall in love with her, and I never really understood what her feelings were on that, because it was like she wanted to save the prince out of the goodness of her heart as a good person, but I'm like, but did she love him? I want to know what her romantic feelings are towards him, specifically, and I didn't feel that I got that. It's sort of a larger trend, because especially in romance fiction, the power dynamics tend to be standard, where the man is, if not dominant, he has more of something going for him. Sometimes in like contemporary it'll be he's just older, or he's her boss, or he's just richer in some way. In fantasy it tends to be that like he's a prince or a king or a lord and the main character is a peasant of some kind. In this case, Evangeline was a peasant and an orphan without any strong connections to anyone, while Jax was a quasi-god figure, immortal and a lord, friends with the prince, superpowered, like the works. And it's not like I think I really don't want people to interpret this and go, that means that you think that power imbalance relationships are evil. And I'm like, not really. It's just that this trend is so prevalent in other books as well, and in the fastest growing genre right now, that I can't help but notice it. Hi. She's coming over to say hi. Where are you going? Okay. She's gone over there. Something about romance books. Romance books, both contemporary and historical and fantastical, have this modus operandi where the man is dominant both in terms of social structure but also in terms of the romance in general. Like, he will generally be the one to make the first move. If I am not correct, tell me so. And the woman is submissive. The woman has less power within the relationship, even if she might have more power, say, magically or something. Usually is the heroine, because by decree of being the main character, the woman will discover magical powers over the course of the story rather than appearing with them straight away. Which also, again, just means that the male characters appear more powerful from the outset. Which is just terribly annoying to me. And I'm not naive. I know that romance and attraction cannot truly exist in a world where there is no power struggle, no conflict, and everyone is egalitarian. Like, that's just not the way the world works. I know that people who are more powerful than you are attractive, especially as sort of like social prizes. But it troubles me that romance fiction, as it becomes more popular, is not leaving this kind of power structure behind. I know that part of the deal is that princes and other, billionaires and other powerful people are attractive because they have power and they choose the protagonist. And as a wish fulfillment, that is very compelling. But it annoys me that it's such a present trend, and that it is almost in many ways the only way that women are expected to experience romance. I'm trying to find other examples, especially in fantasy fiction, because that is where the heart lies, for me, of romances where the woman is already in a position of power and the man is not. Now you move. But usually, because of the sort of fairy tale nature of fantasy fiction, the peasant is nearly always the protagonist, and the royal is the love interest. So therefore, in a female-oriented fantasy where the female character is the main character, it stands to reason that she would always be a peasant or lower class than the characters around her. I know that preferences in fiction don't always translate to preferences in real life. A lot of people who read romance fiction and really enjoy this sort of dynamic will not actively seek it out in their real life, and I don't need to be worried about them. I don't need to clutch my pearls on their behalf. They know what they're doing, for the most part. I do also know that there are many sort of younger, more naive people that might take the wrong idea away. But at the same time, I don't know them, and I can't necessarily protect them from something that is so ephemeral. But I also know that frequently in life, the things we seek out in romance and in sexual situations doesn't necessarily correlate to how we are in real life or in our day-to-day lives. People who want to act submissive in the bedroom might not enjoy that in their day-to-day experiences, and may only seek it out with a particular trusted partner. And therefore, fiction can kind of fall into this category where it's something you seek out in private from time to time, and is not something you really engage in your daily life or in your general beliefs. That being said, it's telling to me that the most popular romance books, and especially romance fantasy books, tend to follow these patriarchal narratives. And I should specify at this point, when I say the biggest romance fantasy books, I think you know what I mean. And I would like to put it on the record and say that I haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas or Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which honestly is a point against all of my argument. I don't currently intend to read them. I have read many summaries. Ironically, the summaries have led me to believe that maybe Fourth Wing doesn't fall into the categories that I have described, vis-a-vis power dynamics and female agency, but I can't know that for sure because I haven't read it. One day I shall, maybe. I know that A Court of Thorns and Roses falls into it in many ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, ACOTAR fans. I know that she has sisters. The main character, Feyre, has sisters with whom she does not have a close relationship. And her primary connections in the first book, at least, are with male characters like Tamlin, Lucian, and Rhysand. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I would be like, I've only read it, but I've barely read it. Whilst the main antagonist, with whom Feyre has a limited connection because she's not in the story for that long, is female. Anyway, I think similarly, Feyre has a limited capacity for agency because she is taken captive. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, you know how that works, at the beginning of the book. I don't know. It bugs me. It makes me think that the most significant choice she makes in the story is to kill that monster at the beginning of the story. But does she even kill it? Is she even, questioning the consequences of her decisions when she kills it, or does she kill it because she's hungry? Does Feyre have any significant choices to make? I know that many things happen to her without her consent, including body modification. She gets a tattoo at some point without, wanting one. Are people into that? Is that a thing? And asking that question is kind of nonsense because I know that it's a fantasy tattoo and it has special powers, I think. But I know that readers of this book are not actively seeking this kind of treatment in real life. I hope. Anyway, going back to the original point, I do believe that the prevalence of patriarchal values, dominant men, and gender, sort of archaic gender roles, let's be real, are prevalent in fantasy and romance, not because the authors themselves are conservative propaganda machines, but rather because those values are present in modern-day romance and in the romance literature of the past. And I understand that these things have correlated all to form this sort of scurrilous present that we're in. But I wonder, how is it possible to reconvene our understanding of romance when our romance fiction is largely the same as it was? How are we going to reconsider a version of romance which is more egalitarian and less misogynistic when we haven't necessarily considered a version of that in our fantasy? And please correct me if I'm wrong, if I have missed out a significant part of Sarah J. Maas's works where she has actively gone against the misogyny that is prevalent in romance. And when I say romance, I mean romance with a lowercase r, because I'm thinking of romance in life, not in fiction. If there's a specific example, please do tell me. I don't know. I haven't read. This is kind of like going to, study a course on like Shakespeare and being like, I've not read Hamlet. Like, it would be kind of insane. Or like turning up to study Jane Austen and being like, I've not read Pride and Prejudice and I don't intend to. Like, this is kind of like deranged behaviour from me, but I stand by it. Present day social problems like the male loneliness epidemic, I said that in air quotes, are sort of centred on problems of romance. Like, the male loneliness epidemic is not because they truly are lonely, it's because they're struggling to make connections with people in their lives, and because men have been socialised to only make strong emotional connections with a romantic partner, usually female. And therefore, a lot of men don't necessarily have strong emotional engagements with their mates, even when they have a lot of mates that they see all the time. Which I find very sad. If you are a man, go out and hug your mates and talk about the deep stuff. Changing economic and social dynamics mean that women are in the workplace. They're expecting better behaviour from their male partners. And currently, a lot of male partners are not willing to provide that. And they are not willing to settle down with women who also need to work, because, let's face it, no one can live in a single income household these days. As a society, we really need to reconsider what romance means and what something romantic really is. If some of the romance stories of the past, like The Notebook, actually aren't as romantic as we may have been led to believe, then is the same true for some, for other stories? Hello. Are you coming to say hi? Oh, that's the camera. Please don't lick it. I was trying to think of romantic pairings in novels that I really enjoy. Not just like fanfic enjoy, but like enjoy. And the one that I came up against was Katniss and Peeta in the Hunger Games, because I'm just really excited for Sunrise on the Reaping, lads. Let's not lie. But I think one of the things I enjoy about the Hunger Games, but Katniss and Peeta specifically, is how it sort of goes against a lot of gender expectations without being inauthentic or forced about it. Katniss's main skill in the arena and in life is her ability to kill things. She's incredibly blunt and dry. And while she's caring, she's not particularly soft in her presentation, let's say. Meanwhile, Peter, his main skills are sort of art and baking, but also PR. His best moments are always before you get into the games, not in. In the games, he's holding his own only because Katniss is there. Outside the games, he's the one that kills the interviews. He's killing it at skills that are usually reserved for fictional women, while Katniss is killing it at skills that are reserved for fictional men. And I think sometimes it bugs me that protagonists in fantasy novels are given the badassery aspect, and like they're really good with a bow and arrow or with magic or with like dragon riding or whatever. But there's no one who is really good at other skills to really offset that, especially not their male counterpart, who usually is even better at killing things and people. And it bugs me in part because I know that skills and traits shouldn't be identified with particular genders, but I know that in this world that they are. And therefore, it bugs me that masculine traits are praised highly, whilst feminine traits aren't necessarily. And that was one of the things that I did genuinely really like about Once Upon a Broken Heart. She wasn't good at killing people. Evangeline was very caring, very soft, very warm, and most of her actions, when she took actions, were done in just for the benefit of caring about people. And I thought that was compelling. There's a reason that I read this book all the way and didn't like give up on it. Like there were things in it that I really liked, even though largely it didn't necessarily work for me. Now, obviously, there's a lot of romantic books that I really like and a lot of romantic fantasy books that I really like. Otherwise, I wouldn't even attempt to read anymore. Like, I am a hater and I love to hate things, but I don't usually make long-ass videos about it. 5-second TikTok at most. It is more that, like, I find myself wanting to write romance more and more, in part because I know it's popular, and let's face it, I'm a slave to attention. I want attention so bad. But also because, it's a really good character dynamic. Like, it's got conflict, goals, wants, all of it built in. If you're struggling with a want for a character, they're in love. Boom. It makes no sense. People fall in love. So obviously romance is quite compelling in that way. I just find that sometimes the models of romance we have are sort of not fulfilling. And I hope that it's not just because I'm sitting there going, oh, well, I can't relate. Because I don't find myself that distantly removed from a lot of the characters that I read in books, even fantasy ones. I suspect it is more because the models of romance that I've grown up with, I've found unsatisfying over the course of my life. And that is true for romance fiction, but also like rom-coms and, just people I see in the world. While I think that people on the internet especially have become really much better at recognizing abusive dynamics, we're not necessarily great at it on the whole. And not every, most dynamics in these books aren't even abusive. But I do want there to be a change in the way romance is considered. Among young women as well as young men. Because, if you're a woman, you're sitting around waiting for a man to ask you out, you can be waiting a long time. Sometimes you've got to make the first move, even if it's not considered the feminine thing to do. Every time I start talking, she makes noises. I don't know, I feel like we have to demand better from our romantic relationships, and it is easier to demand something from fiction where the world is created and the writers are all on TikTok and you can bother them, than it is to demand something from the people that you know in life. If anyone out there knows of any really cool romantic fiction, fantasy or otherwise, that doesn't subscribe to really archaic gender roles, then I would love to hear about it. I've read a lot of queer fantasy and I'm always looking for more. But also I'd love to read, heterosexual fantasy that doesn't necessarily subscribe to these ideals. Because I do believe that the straights can be okay. Sometimes. Anyway, the point being, I don't think that romance writers are agents of conservatism. Not all of them. At least some of them have to be, right? There's people that vote for conservative governments all the time, so it stands to reason that some of them are romance writers. It is more that romance as a particular comfort genre does not benefit from a huge questioning of the world or questioning of societal ideals. That is not to say that I don't think it's possible to question these ideals in romance. I think sometimes that's very compelling. But I think sometimes it means that romance narratives are not compelled to examine societal bias in the way that they necessarily could. Meaning that sometimes societal ideals are enhanced and cemented by romance, both in life and in fiction. Meaning that we end up with romances with dominant male characters and submissive female characters, regardless of which one of them is the protagonist.